The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, written by Arthur Conan Doyle, read by Alex Rains. I had called upon my friend Sherlock Holmes upon the second morning after Christmas, with the intention of wishing him the compliments of the season. He was lounging upon the sofa in a purple dressing gown, a pipe rack within his reach upon the right, and a pile of crumpled morning papers, evidently newly studied, near at hand. Beside the couch was a wooden chair, and on the angle of his back hung a very seedy and disreputable hard felt hat, much the worse for wear and cracked in several places. A lens and a forceps lying upon the seat of the chair suggested that the hat had been suspended in this manner for the purpose of examination. "You are engaged," said I. "Perhaps I interrupt you." "Not at all. I am glad to have a friend with whom I may discuss my results. The matter is a perfectly trivial one." He jerked his thumb in the direction of the old hat. "But there are points in connection with it which are not entirely devoid of interest, and even of instruction." I seated myself in his armchair and warmed my hands before the crackling fire, for a sharp frost had set in, and the windows were thick with ice crystals. "I suppose," I remarked, "that, homely as it looks, this thing has some deadly story linked to it, that it is a clue which will guide you in the solution of some mystery and punishment of some crime." No crime," said Sherlock Holmes, laughing. "Only one of the whimsical little incidents which will happen when you have 4 million human beings all jostling each other within the space of a few square miles. Amid the action and reaction of so dense a swarm of humanity, every possible combination of events may be expected to take place, and many a little problem will be presented which may be striking and bizarre without being criminal. We have already had experience of such." "So much so," I remarked, "that the last 6 cases, which I have added to my notes, 3 have been entirely free of any legal crime." "Precisely. You allude to my attempt to recover the Irene Adler papers, to the singular case of Miss Mary Sutherland, and to the adventure of the man with the twisted lip. Well, I have no doubt that this small matter will fall into the same innocent category. You know Peterson, the commissioner?" "Yes." "Well, it is to him that this trophy belongs." "It is his hat." No, he found it. Its owner is unknown. I beg that you will look upon it not as a battered billycock, but as an intellectual problem. And first, as to how it came here. It arrived upon Christmas morning in company with a good fat goose, which is, I have no doubt, roasting at this moment in front of Peterson's fire. The facts are these. About 4 o'clock on Christmas morning, Peterson, who, as you know, is a very honest fellow, was returning from some small jollification and was making his way homeward towards Tottenham Court Road. In front of him he saw, in a gaslight, a tallish man walking with a slight stagger and carrying a white goose slung over his shoulder. As he reached the corner of Goodge Street, a row broke out between this stranger and a little knot of roughs. One of the latter knocked off the man's hat, on which he raised his stick to defend himself and, swinging it over his head, smashed the shop window behind him. Peterson had rushed forward to protect the stranger from his assailants, but the man, shocked at having his broken window, and seeing an official-looking person in uniform rushing towards him, dropped his goose, took to his heels, and vanished amid the labyrinth of small streets which lie at the back of Tottenham Court Road. The roughs had also fled at the appearance of Peterson, so that he was left in possession of the field of battle, and also of the spoils of victory in the shape of this battered hat and a most unimpeachable Christmas goose. which surely he must have restored to their owner. My dear fellow, there lies the problem. It is true that Mrs. Henry Baker was printed upon a small card which was tied to the bird's left leg, but it is also true that the initials H.B. are legible upon the lining of the hat, but there are thousands of Bakers, and some hundreds of Henry Bakers in this city of ours, and it's not easy to restore lost property to any one of them. What, then, did Peterson do? Well, he brought round the hat and goose to me on this Christmas morning, knowing that even the smallest problems are of interest to me. The goose we retained until this morning, when there were signs that, in spite of the slight frost, it would be well that it should be eaten without unnecessary delay. Its finder has carried it off, therefore, to fulfill the ultimate destiny of a goose, while I continue to retain the hat of an unknown gentleman who lost his Christmas dinner. Did he not advertise? No. Then what clue do you have as to his identity? Well, only so much as we can deduce from his hat. Precisely. But you are joking. What can you gather from this old battered felt? Here is my lens. You know my methods. What can you gather for yourself as an individual about this man who has worn this article? I took the tattered object in my hands and turned it over rather ruefully. It was a very ordinary black hat of unusual round shape, hard and much the worse for wear. The lining had been of red silk, but it was a good deal discolored, for there was no maker's name, but, as Holmes had remarked, the initials H.B. were scrawled upon the side. It was pierced in the brim for a hat securer, but the elastic was missing. For the rest, it was cracked, exceedingly dusty, and spotted in several places, although there seemed to have been some attempt to hide the discolored patches by smearing them with ink. I can see nothing, said I, handing it back to my friend. On the contrary, Watson, you see everything. You fail, however, to reason from what you can see. You are too timid in drawing your inferences. Well, then, pray tell me what is it that you can infer from this hat? He picked it up and gazed at this particular introspective fashion which was characteristic of him. It is perhaps less suggestive than it might have been, he remarked, and yet there are a few inferences which are very distinct, and a few others which represent at least a strong balance of probability. That the man was highly intellectual is, of course, obvious upon the face of it, and also that he was fairly well-to-do within the past 3 years, although it has now fallen upon evil days. He has foresight, but less now than formerly, pointing to a moral retrogression which, when taken with the decline of his fortune, seems to indicate some evil influence, probably drink, at work upon him. This may also account for the obvious fact that his wife has ceased to love him. My dear Holmes, he has, however, retained some degree of self-respect, he continued, disregarding my remonstrance. He is a man who leads a sedentary life, goes out little, and is out of training entirely. He is middle-aged. He has grizzled hair, which he has cut within the last few days, and which he anoints with lime cream. These are the more patent facts which are to be deduced from his hat. Also, by the way, it is extremely improbable that he has gas laid in his house. You are certainly joking, Holmes. Not in the least. It is possible that even now, when I give you these results, you are able to see how they are attained. I have no doubt that I am very stupid, but I must confess I am unable to follow you. For example, how do you deduce that this man was intellectual? For answer, Holmes clapped the hat upon his head. It came right over his forehead and settled upon the bridge of his nose. It is a question of cubic capacity, said he. A man with so large a brain must have something in it. The decline of his fortunes, then. Well, this hat is 3 years old. These flat brims curled at the edge came in then. It is a hat of a very best quality. Look at the band of ribbed silk and the excellent lining. If this man could afford to buy so expensive a hat 3 years ago, and has no hat since, then he has assuredly gone down in the world. Well, that is clear enough, certainly, but how about the foresight and the moral retrogression? Sherlock Holmes laughed. Here is the foresight, said he, putting his finger upon the little disc at the loop of the hat's secure. They are never sold upon hats. If this man ordered one, it is a sign of a certain amount of foresight, since he went out of his way to take this precaution against the wind. But since we see that this has broken the elastic, and he has not troubled to replace it, it is obvious that he has less foresight now than formerly, which is a distinct proof of a weakening nature. On the other hand, he has endeavored to conceal some of these stains upon the felt by daubing them with ink, which is a sign that he may have not entirely lost his self-respect. Your reasoning is certainly plausible. The further points, that he is middle-aged, that his hair is grizzled, and that it has been recently cut, and that he uses lime cream, are all to be gathered from a close examination of the lower part of the lining. The lens discloses a large number of hair-ends, clean-cut by the scissors of the barber. They all appear to be adhesive, and there is a distinct odor of lime cream. This dust, you will observe, is not the gritty gray dust of the street, but the fluffy brown dust of the house, showing that it has been hung up indoors most of the time, while the marks of the moisture upon the inside are proof positive that the wearer perspired very freely, and could therefore hardly be in the best of training. But his wife, you said she had ceased to love him. This hat has not been brushed for weeks. When I see you, my dear Watson, with a week's accumulation of dust upon your hat, when your wife allows you to go out in such a state, I shall fear that you also have been unfortunate enough to lose your life's affection. To lose your wife's affection. But he may be a bachelor. Nay, bringing home a goose is a peace offering to his wife. Remember the card upon the bird's leg. You have an answer to everything. But how on earth do you deduce that the gas is not laid in his house? A one tallow stain, or even two, might come by chance, but when I see no less than 5, I think there can be little doubt that the individual must have brought into frequent contact with burning tallow, walks upstairs at night, probably with his hat in one hand and a guttering candle in the other. Anyhow, he never got tallow stains from a gas jet. Are you satisfied? Well, it is very ingenious, said I, laughing. But since, as you said just now, there has been no crime committed and no harm done save the loss of a goose, all this seems to be rather a waste of energy. Sherlock Holmes had opened his mouth to reply, when the door flew open, and Peterson, the commissioner, rushed into the apartment with the flushed cheeks and the face of a man who was dazed with astonishment. "The goose! Mr. Holmes, the goose, sir!" he gasped. "Hey, what of it then? Has it returned to life and flapped off through the kitchen window?" Holmes twisted himself round upon the sofa to get a fairer view of the man's excited face. "See her, sir. See what my wife found in its crop." He held out his hand and displayed upon the center of his palm a brilliant, scintillating blue stone, rather smaller than a bean in size, but of such purity and radiance that it twinkled like an electric point in the dark hollow of his hand. Sherlock Holmes sat up with a whistle. "By Jove, Peterson," said he, "this is a treasure trove indeed. I suppose you know what you've got?" "A diamond, sir, a precious stone. It cuts into glass as though it were putty. It's more than a precious stone. It is the precious stone." "Not the Countess of Morcar's Blue Carbuncle," I ejaculated. "Precisely so. I ought to know its size and shape, seeing that I've read the advertisement about it in the Times every day lately. It is absolutely unique, and its value can only be conjectured, but the reward offered of £1,000 is certainly not within a 20th part of the market price. £1,000! Great Lord of mercy! The commissioners plumped down in a chair and stared from one another at us. That is the reward, and I have reason to know that there are sentimental considerations in the background which would induce the Countess to part with half her fortune if she could but recover the gem. It was lost, if I remember all right, at the Hotel Cosmopolitan, I remarked. Precisely so. On December 22nd, just 5 days ago, John Horner, a plumber, was accused of having abstracted it from a lady's jewel case. The evidence against him was so strong that the case had been referred to the Aziz. I have some account of the matter here, I believe. He rummaged amid his newspapers, glancing over the dates until at last he smoothed one over, doubled it over, and read the following paragraph. Hotel Cosmopolitan jewel robbery. John Horner, 26, plumber, was brought up on charge of having the 22nd instance abstracted from the jewel case of the Countess of Morcar the valuable gem known as the Blue Carbuncle. James Ryder, upper attendant at the hotel, gave his evidence to the effect that he had shown Horner up to the dressing room of the Countess of Morcar upon the day of the robbery in order that he might solder the second bar of the grate, which was loose. He had remained with Horner for some little time, but had finally been called away. On returning, he found Horner had disappeared, that the bureau had been forced open, and that the small Morcoro casket in which, as it afterward transpired, the Countess was accustomed to keeping her jewel, was lying empty upon the dressing-table. Ryder instantly gave the alarm, and Horner was arrested the very same evening, but the stone could not be found upon his person or in his rooms. Catherine Cusack, maid to the Countess, disposed to having Ryder heard cry of dismay on discovering the robbery, and to having rushed into his room, where she found matters as described by the last witness. Inspector Bradstreet, B Division, gave evidence as to the arrest of Horner, who struggled frantically and protested his innocence in the strongest terms. Evidence of the previous conviction for robbery having been given against this prisoner, the magistrate refused to deal summarily with the offense, but referred it to the Aziz. Horner, who had shown up signs of intense emotion during the proceedings, faded away at the conclusion and was carried out of court. So much for the police court, said Holmes thoughtfully, tossing aside the paper. The question is now for us to solve is the sequence of events leading from the rifled jewel case at one end of the crop of a goose in Tottenham Court Road at the other. You see, Watson, our little deductions have suddenly assumed a much more important and less innocent aspect. Here is the stone. The stone came from the goose, and the goose came from Henry Baker, the gentleman with the bad hat, and all the other characteristics which I have bored you. And so now we must set ourselves very seriously to finding this gentleman and ascertaining what part he has played in this little mystery. To do this, we must try the simplest means first, and these lie undoubtedly in an advertisement in all the evening papers. If this fails, I shall have recourse to other methods. What will you say? Give me a pencil and that slip of paper. Now then, found at the corner of Grode Street, a goose and a black felt hat. Mr. Henry Baker can have the same by applying at 6:30 this evening at 221B Baker Street. That is clear and concise. Very well, but will he see it? Well, he is sure to keep an eye on the papers, since to the poor man the loss was a heavy one. He was clearly so scared by his mischance in breaking the window, and by the approach of Peterson when he thought nothing of the flight, but since he must have bitterly regretted the impulse which caused him to drop his bird. Then, again, the introduction of his name will cause him to see it, for everyone who knows him will direct his attention to it. Here you are, Peterson. Run down to the advertising agency and have this put in the evening papers. In which, sir? Oh, Globe, Star, Pall Mall, James, Evening News, Standard, Echo, any of the others that occur to you. Very well, sir. And the stone? Ah, yes. I shall keep the stone. Thank you. And as I say, Peterson, just buy a goose on your way back and leave it here with me. for we must have one to give this gentleman in place of the one which your family is now devouring." When the commissioner had gone, Holmes took up the stone and held it against the light. "It's a bonny thing," said he. "Just see how it glints and sparkles. Of course it is a nucleus and a focus of crime. Every good stone is, but they are the devil's pet baits. In the larger and older Junes, every facet may stand for a bloody deed. This stone is not yet 20 years old. It was found in the banks of the Amoy River in southern China, and is remarkable in having every characteristic of the carbuncle, save that it is blue in shade instead of ruby red. In spite of its youth, it is already a sinister history. There have been 2 murders, a vitriol throwing, a suicide, and several robberies brought about for the sake of this 40-grain weight of crystallized charcoal. Now, who would think that so petty a toy would be a purveyor to the gallows and to the prison? I'll lock it up in my strongbox now, and have a line to the Countess to say that we have it. Do you think this man Horner is innocent?" "Well, I cannot tell." "Well, then, do you imagine that this other one, Henry Baker, has anything to do with the matter?" "It is, I think, more likely that Henry Baker is an absolutely innocent man. One who had no idea that the bird which he was carrying was of considerably more value than if it were made of solid gold. That, however, I shall determine by a very simple test, if we have an answer to our advertisement." "And you can do nothing until then?" "Nothing." "In that case, I shall continue my professional round, but I shall come back in the evening at the hour you've mentioned, for I would like to see the solution of so tangled a business." "Very glad to see you. I dine at 7. There is a woodcock, I believe. And by the way, in view of recent occurrences, perhaps I ought to ask Mrs. Hudson to examine its crop.